from human inventiveness, human folly, human wickedness, and human inadvertence. The ramifications of information technology, nanotechnology, and nuclear experimentation and the rest have still to be understood, but Lord Rees's conclusion was to give our civilization only a 50% chance of survival beyond the end of this century. Well then, what are we to expect? Are we capable of establishing a lasting relationship of mutual benefit to the living earth and those of the unruly inhabitants who are ourselves? How are we to recognize that the last 200 years or so have been a sort of bonanza of inventiveness, exploitation, and consumption which may not continue? All successful species, whether bivalves or beetles or humans, multiply until they come up against the environmental stops, reach some accommodation with the rest of nature, and willy-nilly restore some balance. And in the long history of the Earth, we are the only species capable of recognizing that the problems I've outlined exist, and that sooner rather than later something has to be done. In fact, most of the solutions to the problems I've outlined are known. It's not the occasion for going through them, although I should be very happy to discuss them afterwards. But briefly, we have to rethink a lot of economics. We need to replace consumerism as a goal. We need to give high priority to conservation of the natural world. We have to disperse agricultural production. We need to work out new ways of generating energy. And, very important for someone who, as you've heard, was an ambassador to the United Nations, we need to work out the necessary institutional means of coping with global problems. There are thousands of minuscule ways in which we will have to rethink the ways in which we run our daily lives. We all suffer from the disease of what has been called conceptual sclerosis. Little is more difficult than learning to think differently, above all when problems go to the roots of the conventional wisdom. And believe you me, we are all immersed in the conventional wisdom. Well, now I want to turn from past and present to the future of our species in a world which is changing under human pressure before our eyes. This is the world which you and your children will inhabit. And I'm sure that members of the new generation well know already that the future will not be a simple continuation of the past. Yet bear in mind that nearly all forecasting turns out to be wrong. At every point there is always a choice of alternatives, even if we take the wrong one more often than not. We do well, and I must underline this point, we do well to expect the unexpected. In his book, which some of you may have seen, called The Meaning of the 21st Century, James Martin laid out what he saw as the prospects, and I quote, he said this: "The 21st century is like a deep river canyon with a narrow bottleneck at its center. As we head into the canyon, we'll have to cope with a rate of change that becomes much more intense, a whitewater raft trip down an unknown river with the currents becoming much faster and rougher, a time when technology will accelerate at a phenomenal rate." And he went on to identify what he thought were the main challenges facing us at the moment. Some relate to the Earth as a whole and come naturally. For example, the natural disruptions known throughout history. Volcanic explosions, earthquakes, impacts from space, changing climates and variations in ecosystems. But other challenges relate specifically to humans and their ability to force change as well as to respond and adapt to it. And on this, James Martin wrote this: "As the population climbs, global tensions and pollutions will grow, and the danger of massive famines will increase. The population of the world will continue to grow. The capability to feed such a population will steadily decrease as water tables drop, farms in poor countries are abandoned, and the huge new consumer class in China, India, and 18 other countries changes its eating habits so that it consumes more and more meat, which needs much more grain, and hence enormously more water for grasslands." Well, In turn, of course, this will affect human migration between countries and continents, widening divisions between rich and poor within and between countries, increasing the vulnerability of cities, promoting the growth of terrorism, increasing the risks of war and with unimaginably horrible weapons, and exhausting often irreplaceable resources. On this reckoning, we will be lucky to come out the other side of that deep water canyon with anything like civilization as we know it. But this, of course, is not the whole story, and thank goodness. I want now to jump 100 years and look from that vantage point to look backwards. And in doing so, I shall assume, I hope correctly, that humans will have faced up to and coped with at least some of these problems by then. People are not stupid. So what will the world look like? What will the new generation think, say, in 100 years' time? Your great-grandchildren or grandchildren, how, in looking back, will they look at the world as it will then be? Well, I think first, they're likely to be living in a more globalized world, a rapid communication, ideas, units of information, or memes, you've probably heard about meme theory, will pass almost instantaneously between countries, communities, and individuals. The wiring of the planet with fiber optics, cellular wireless, satellites, and digital television is already transforming human relationships. For the first time, there will be something like a single human civilization, a single human culture. Human numbers in cities or elsewhere will almost certainly be reduced, but some people will live much longer, bringing its own train of problems. Their distribution will be different. It's been suggested that an optimum population for the Earth in terms of its resources would be nearer to 2.5 billion rather than, as now, between 6 and 7 billion or even 9 billion later this century, which is some of the predictions. Communications are likely to be more dispersed, without the daily tides of people flowing in and out of cities for work. Agriculture will be more local and specialized, with more reliance on hydroponics. Energy and transport systems will be decentralized. Archaeologists in the future may even come to wonder what all those roads were for. Then there are other developments in information technology. Here come the most radical possibilities of all. So far, evolution has proceeded by natural selection in its various aspects. In the last few thousand years, humans have played games with it through artificial breeding of organisms, some from cereals to cows and dogs, to suit their purposes. Such processes were always slow, but now, through lateral gene transfer, humans may be rapidly producing new varieties, subspecies, and even new species, and that, of course, could apply to humans themselves. This kind of world was explored by H.G. Wells, well, more than 100 years ago. And he invented what he called Eloi and Morlocks. Eloi were those up above, and the Morlocks were those who did the dirty work, who were down below. At the time, more than a century ago, it seemed an amusing fantasy. No longer. Redesigning humans has become a real possibility. It's worth remembering how vulnerable even the Eloi were. And this raises the question of evolution itself. At present, we can alter isolated genes while disregarding the totality of what genes can do.